The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical Psychology for Today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, voiced by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from Learning How to Learn by Idries Shah. This audio has been made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. Method, System, and Conditioning. There are 4 factors which, when applied upon human beings, program them like machines. These are the factors which are used in indoctrination and conditioning. By their use, deliberate or otherwise, self-applied or otherwise, the human mind is made more mechanical and will tend to think along stereotyped lines. Innumerable experiments, recent and ancient, have fully verified the presence and effect of these factors. They are tension alternating with relaxation, sloganization, and repetition. Because most human beings are trained to accept these factors as part of their learning process, almost everything which is presented to a human being to be learned is generally converted by him into material which he applies by these methods. The test of a teaching system and of its success is whether 1. It is applied by these methods, knowingly or otherwise, and 2. It develops into a system which uses these methods. In the various groupings of people engaged in this kind of teaching whom I have contacted during the past few years, virtually none is free from this element or these factors. The result is that one set of slogans has been changed for another, and phrases like "man is asleep," words like "essence," certain exercises and techniques as well as literary material have been studied so closely and so diligently that they have succeeded in the main only in indoctrination. Their instrumental effect is spent. It is mainly for this reason that tradition repeatedly says that the formulation must change in accordance with the people, the place, and the work. It is extremely easy to test the individuals who have developed, through no fault of their own, this conditioned reflex response to work terms and other teaching stimuli. Such people always respond in a typical manner to approaches made to them, and in this respect they do not differ from people who have been indoctrinated into any static and linear system, political, patriotic, economic, religious, philosophical, where the extra dimension of understanding is weak or absent. There is, however, a saving grace. This is that if we retrace our position to the point just before the learning and teaching became established as a conditioning in the mind of the individuals, we can reclaim the flexibility which the work demands. The methods used to do this, however, are not ones which are familiar to most people. You have to be able to understand before you can verify. People ordinarily do not reach deeply enough into themselves to find out how to learn about what the Sufis call reality. They make premature assumptions about how to learn, and what attracts them must be good, and so on, which, in the end, defeats their putative purpose. The Limbless Fox. In the Bostan of Sadi, there is the tale of the man who once saw a limbless fox and wondered how it managed to be so well fed. Deciding to watch it, he found that it had positioned itself where a lion brought its kill. After eating, the lion would go away, and the fox would eat its leavings. So the man decided to allow fate to serve him in the same way. Sitting down in a street and waiting, all that happened was that he became more and more weak and hungry, for nobody and nothing took any interest in him. Eventually a voice spoke and said, "Why should you behave like a lamed fox? Why should you not be a lion, so that others might benefit from your leavings?" This story is itself an interesting test. One sometimes finds that it encourages people with a desire to teach to set themselves up as teachers, and enables others, who are more humble, to rearrange their ideas so that they can learn first, no matter what they readily imagine about being able to teach, and benefit others from getting their own focus right. Everything man needs is in the world. How does he use it? Think of the Eastern proverb, God provides the food, men provide the cooks. Western culture. Question: why are you critical of Western culture? Answer: the answer simply is that I am not really critical of it in the way that I think you mean. You must bear 3 things in mind when you ask this kind of question, or risk nobody ever bothering to answer it at all. 1. You have to have some facts to back it up, either specifics or general facts, either to support your question or to get a productive reply. 2. You have to realize that the modern world in which we at the moment live is very widely suffused with Western culture, and that therefore it is almost impossible to miss it if one is critical about almost anything. It is like saying, why do you kill millions of innocent beings, bacteria, every time you breathe in? The one may be incidental to the other. 3. This question is being asked and answered in a Western country, a part of Western culture, where, because of that culture, agonizing self-appraisals, criticism and reproach almost ad infinitum have been standard behavior for a considerable period, and without which, if you only listen and read what surrounds you, life would perhaps come to a halt. If there is any really good reason for criticizing Western culture as such, it is that one should deplore its failure to nurture and maintain not the criticism on which it constantly prides itself, but the clear thinking which, say, the Greeks, supposedly Westerners, had, and which should have been passed to you to enable you to answer this question for yourself, thus saving time and effort and using mental capacity for something a little more advanced. Western people, whatever their ideology, spend much time in the engineering of belief, conviction, commitment. They keep changing the name, but the process is the same. I call it not critical, but descriptive to mention this, and to offer the remedy in the saying, when you are most convinced, that is the time to use caution about your certainty. Western culture, like any other culture, could well take to heart this ancient Eastern saying, however useful a garment, it is not for eating. The Western tradition. Question: can we have tales and illustrations from the Western tradition which illustrate or make available the kind of knowledge which is so often quoted from the East? Answer: you can certainly have such examples, but the problem is that the understanding of the example has, in the West, generally been trivialized. Give a dog a bad name and hang it. There are many jokes and stories in Western literature and folklore which may be employed in the development of wisdom, but the convention has been to write them up as short stories, or to laugh at their funny side. As a result, people are inoculated against the effect which they could have in provoking insights. Question: why has this not happened to Eastern literature? Answer: because the concept of the pearl within the banal shell has been constantly repeated and kept alive. Interestingly enough, the concept has been stressed sufficiently often in the Western translations and repetitions of these stories to insist on this element being maintained as a hypothetical possibility. This insistence that the oyster may contain a pearl, in place of merely selling oysters, as it were, makes it possible for the Western man to look for this content in stories which have an Eastern flavor, when he would not tolerate it in a Western story. Question: is there a ready example? The hero husband. Answer: take the tale of the woman who would not marry a man because he was not successful. She said she wanted a hero for a husband. He went to Africa and became a world-famous explorer. When he came back to claim her, she said that she had married in the meantime. He demanded to know who the paragon was who had won her, so that he himself might pay homage to such a man. She confessed, "He is only the professional at the golf club up the road." This was made into a wry short story by a Western writer. Its depth, wisdom, and sheer power is obscured by the local Western habit of looking only for payoff lines, humor as humor, characterization, plot, climax and anticlimax, and so on. In this process, other values of the story have been lost. But if it were put in an Eastern setting, even Western audiences might see something of great instructional value in it. And there are dozens more of this kind. Most, but not all, of the word artifacts formerly current in the West have thus been appropriated by shallow wordsmiths or occultists. But some remain, and much more can be retrieved. Tale of an Ear. The materials are often to be found in the West, in encounters, in jokes and tales, in events. But the skill in using them is not there, though it can be developed. One of the basic Sufi needs is to enable people to see themselves as they really are, and to clear away imaginings about what they are or what they think they are doing. Here is a Western anecdote, good enough for a Sufi demonstration tale. A man went to the Van Gogh exhibition in New York. The place was so jammed with people that he could not get near the pictures. He went away and carved an ear from corned beef, then framed it and returned to hang it on the exhibition wall, marked Ear of Van Gogh. The crowd surrounded this object, thus allowing the true art lover to see the paintings, and showing that they were themselves there only for sensation. In a Sufi context, this tale would have been used both to point out the difference between aesthetics and emotion, and also for the participants to see themselves as they really were. In the West, however, such tales are usually employed only as jokes, enabling the hearer to feel amused, and perhaps relieved that he was not there, or superior because others had been deceived successfully. It is interesting to reflect that, while the Westerner wants to know if there are traditions in his own history which will help him, the Easterner will tend to know whether the material will help him, wherever it comes from. I am reminded of the old saying, "The child remarks, 'That hawk is white,' while the adult asks, 'How sharp are its talons?' And I hope that we do not forget, while we are on this subject, that most of the most prized traditions in the West are derived, and not without pride, from the Middle East, and especially the Eastern Mediterranean. How does the Sufi teach? Question. Sufis do not teach by stereotypes, as you often say. How does the Sufi teach? Answer. The Sufi teacher has the task of communicating his message and reality. He has to reduce, not increase, the effect of his own personality in favor of content. A test of the suitability of a student is to find out whether he can set aside the fixation upon a technique, person, or school, and make himself open to receiving a comprehensive teaching. The Sufi teacher's mission is to be in the service of those who can learn. He does not exist to please or to displease anyone. To accord with the preconceptions of others as to appearances is irrelevant to his functions, though not necessarily, as Ibn Arabi reminds us, to his social viability. He works in accordance with the prospects of his students and the possibility of maintaining the continuation of the community of Sufis. He does not hand out formulas, nor does he insist upon the performance of mechanical procedures. His knowledge, on the contrary, makes it possible for him to prescribe apposite studies for suitable people, at an indicated time, in the proper place. Most people, whatever their opinions and protestations, do not want to learn. Contrary to appearances, they tend to engage in activities which they use as a substitute for learning. These activities they call studies. Sometimes this proclivity is one which has been trained into them, through books or human contact, even by well-meaning imitators. This causes it to be assumed that certain shallow experiences represent spirituality or the transcendent, or have some other significance which is in fact absent. If you really want to learn, do not be surprised if someone tries to teach you, and do not lightly reject the method. People who do not know the real bases of a study are, of course, likely to be surprised when its methods are revealed to them. This revelation is what is known to Sufis as heart knowledge. Dunoon says, "What the eyes see is knowledge, what the heart knows is certainty." False certainty is obsession, whether implanted or otherwise. Most people nowadays are educated by means of mechanical thinking and within very limited frameworks which, in turn, enable them only to handle certain kinds of experience. This education is excellent, but only for its own purposes. Products of this training use its impoverished and restrictive principles to assess such things as Sufi learning. No wonder we get bizarre results. Rumi tells of a Sufi and a grammarian who were sitting together. The grammarian announced that a word must be one of three things, referring to the grammatical assessment. At once the Sufi went into a frenzy and cried out, "I have struggled for 20 years in the hope that there was more to a word than this, and now you have removed my hope." In this way, the Sufi tried to point out to the grammarian that his terms of study were far too narrow, and certainly could not be sustained without the preamble that this holds true in grammar. There is another factor in teaching and learning, portrayed in a story. In a library. 3 dervishes met in a library. The first said, "I'm going to read all the books of Sufi wisdom. Then I shall ponder their meanings and see how they relate to me." The second said, "I shall copy out the books in my own hand so that their lessons may sink in. Then I shall review them in their inner and outer significance." The third said, "I shall earn enough to buy all the books, and I shall then read them. Then I shall question you two in order to profit from the parts of the books which your words and actions indicate you have not understood." "And I," said a fourth dervish, who was passing by and had stopped to listen to them, "I shall study the third dervish in order to see if his vanity has allowed him to see what there is to see in the books and in the products of the books." The Sufi may not be able to teach by direct teaching as ordinarily understood, even though people request this teaching. It is related by Sheikh Fariduddin Attar that the great Samnun Muhib was once asked, on his return from a pilgrimage, to give them a lecture. The lecture. When the Sufi spoke, the people were completely unmoved. So the Sheikh addressed himself to the candles in the mosque where they were, and it was they which rolled about and burned themselves out. The Sufi drew the parallel to his audience and left. This podcast is copyright 2018, the Idries Shah Foundation.